Well, hi and welcome, and thanks for joining me for our midday stand. Here's a scripture to encourage you this lunchtime. It comes from Matthew chapter 11 and verse 28. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest." I was reflecting on that word rest, and if you heard Rachel this morning, she made this statement encouraging us to enter into that season of leaping into our healing at this time. And she used this little phrase, rest brings healing. Rest brings healing. And taking a rest is always a challenging thing. I don't know how many of you are diligent about actually taking a day off every week. Very often we sort of find all sorts of other things to do, and we use an excuse of too many things on the jobs list. But actually God is pretty strict about 6 days you shall work, and the 7th you shall rest. And then when we don't manage to do it, he's gracious and he says, just come to me, just come. And I find it interesting that all the way through Matthew's gospel up until that point, Jesus is saying, follow me, follow me. But where it comes to rest, he says, not just follow me and do what I'm doing, but come to me. Actually, literally, come to Jesus. And then the actual word rest that is used here is a little Greek word, anapeo. And I looked that up, and it literally means to give ourselves permission to rest. In other words, Jesus is saying, come to me and I will give you permission to rest. Well, I know that for me, if my boss, for example, gives me permission to take some time off, I feel much more inclined to just enjoy that. There's 101 million things I'd love to do with time off, but when I know I've got permission, somehow that changes a mindset in me. And here Jesus says, come to me and I will give you permission to stop. I wonder whether some of this season is literally permission to stop. We've been running at 1,000 knots and Jesus says, stop, just stop. Take this time of enforced rest and come to me. We've got a choice to make what we use these days for. And he says, come to me and rest. That little word rest also, anapeo, means to literally cease activity, to cease that freneticness of our everyday. It means to give permission to take a break. It means permission to be deeply refreshed. And as Rachel was saying to us this morning, that rest brings healing. And so many of us never find that true acceleration of healing because maybe we just don't rest. We don't come to him. We don't come and take his yoke upon us. And then that little phrase of take my yoke upon you. It literally is a picture in the Aramaic tradition of bending your neck to submit to the yoking with something else. For an animal, it was bending their neck to be yoked to another animal. But for us, Jesus is saying, let me fit you with the yoke that perfectly fits you. Submit, bend your neck. You know, we are a stubborn people. I know I can be incredibly stubborn. I wonder whether you can as well. But you know, when we don't rest, we suffer for it. And in Hebrews chapter 4, it's like things have gone on a bit in the story. And the writer to the Hebrews says that God says, there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. It's still waiting for us. We haven't entered into it. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. And I looked up, I was fascinated whether that word rest in Hebrews is the same as the word rest in Matthew. And in fact, it's a little bit different. The root is there, but it's a little bit different. And the Hebrews word of rest, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, is katapoesis. And this is literally the place in which God dwells, the resting place in which we find God's very presence. So in Hebrews it says, maybe you haven't been so good at taking a rest, giving yourself permission just to stop. And now I'm encouraging you to go that bit further. Come and find the place in which I dwell, says God. Come and find that literal resting place, that abiding place. And in that place, you will be renewed. In that place, you will find your healing, body, mind, soul, and spirit. So then it goes on in Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 11, let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one will perish because of disobedience. God gives gentle advice, and then he underscores it and says, this is not just a good idea. This is actually my command to you. Take a break. Have some rest. And then it comes to the end of the story and he says, that rest is still there. Come on, now be diligent. Take and make every effort to enter that rest. Because actually in that place, you will find yourself. But more than that, the great reward of entering that rest is that we find God himself. And in that place, everything falls into perspective. So my prayer for us this lunchtime is, let's enter the rest. Let us be obedient. Let us be faith-filled and come running. Be diligent to enter his rest. And may we find that healing for our souls. May God really bless you and give you his rest today.